It is the 5th of March, 2024. It's somebody's birthday today. You know what? I think it's Jingle's family. But anyway, here we are.
Catalyst.
Is today the birthday of Catalyst?
I have kind of the feeling that it is. I'm not sure, but
Okay,
yeah,
let's
I
call
saw
it
a
that.
tweet. I
Let's
saw a
call
tweet
it
that
that.
it.
5th of January, excuse me, 5th of March. Here we are, 3 months into the year. And we get together every Tuesday at about 1800 UTC for what's called Playground. Here in the United States, by the way, you will turn your clocks ahead this weekend. And the time of Playground will change for you, but not the rest of the world, because we are the exception when we change our clocks. So all of these Gimbalabs meeting times, remember that they are set to UTC time, which does not change. And so anytime that you live in a country and you change your clocks, all of these meeting times will change for you. So just keep that in mind. But what do? We spend the first 15 minutes just talking about whatever we feel like talking about. We're usually not on air for that part, and that was the case today. Today we spent those first 15 minutes having a little pre-conversation about next week's presentation called All About Games from our friend Newman right here. Hey, Newman. So looking forward to that one. But really, it's very much an open space. If you're working on a real product, you can come pitch it. If you're working on a loose idea, you can share and ask for feedback. Or like you'll see me do today, you can just start a conversation about something you've been thinking about. Often, playground presentations do some or all of these things. Any questions about how Playground works? I'm looking at the calendar here. We've got Newman next week, March 12th, but then we've got some open weeks over the next few for the rest of March and into April. And so if you would like to give a presentation like this, feel free to take one of these slots. And you can find all the details at gimbalabs.com/playground. So without further ado, let's jump in. I wanted to lead a conversation today. And here's a Miro board. I'll move these slides over onto the Playground board after, but I had a draft here, so I wanted to use these. And what happens when I present this? Do you see my screen with like the words parallel serialization on it?
Yes.
That's it.
Sure.
Cool. So just going to use a little bit of the presentation mode for just a minute before we go interactive. I'd like to have a conversation about the topics of parallelism, serialization, and collaboration, and see if we can draw some connections between these three things. Just got to rearrange the screen a little bit. So in early 2024 here at Gimbalabs, we collectively got together and wrote this primary driver. What are we here for? Gimbalabs seeks to provide open, replicable, safe spaces to learn, to explore, and to empower individuals and organizations anywhere so that we can solve meaningful problems. And today I want to zoom in on the meaningful problems bit for just a little while and ask this guiding question. How can more of us spend more of our time focusing on meaningful problems, while at the same time recognizing fully that the word meaningful is relative to each of us, right? You might find something meaningful that I do not, and I shouldn't have the ability to stop you from doing what is meaningful to you, right? So we have this question, and in order to get into this question, I was hoping that we could just do a little bit of thinking on the page. No surprise, we've done this before at Gimbalabs, filling out some sticky notes. And so I already put the Miro link in the chat. I just want to check that it's there. Yeah, you should be able to access this board. And yeah, I see Juan's here. I see Harsha's in. Excellent. And let's just spend 2 minutes on each of these questions. I'm going to set a timer, just 2 minutes. We'll spend more time on these questions throughout. But just to give us a few things on the page, we're going to spend 2 minutes on the question, what's something you want to learn? Then we're going to spend 2 minutes on the question, what's something you want to do? And then we'll spend a few minutes on the question, what is a problem you want to solve? And this is just going to give us source material to refer back to later. If you don't have access to Miro for some reason, feel free to just drop notes in the Zoom chat here or unmute and speak, and I'll record for you. Otherwise, I see a bunch of people are in the Miro already. So I'm going to set this timer. Have fun, everybody.
Extend. 30 seconds. Yes.
Oh, but people are already moving to the second one, so we're good. So yeah, here, we're not even going to discuss the raw stuff here yet. This is just raw material. So I'm just going to move the screen over to question number 2 and give everybody 2 minutes for number 2 and 2 minutes for number 3. So I'll start a 2 minute timer here, but if you want to move between the different boards, you have a total of 4 more minutes to answer the next 2 questions.
I see. We jumped ahead. We skipped ahead. Okay.
Love it. I always do. I would never blame anybody. So yeah, the question now is, what is something you want to do? right, so that was our 2 minutes for question number 2. What's something you want to do? And people are already working on the final question, number 3, what's a problem you want to solve? I'm just going to set the timer again for 2 more minutes, and then we'll move on. All right, thanks everybody. And you all know how Miro works. These sticky notes are here. They can be rearranged. They can be revisited anytime. And that's exactly how we're going to use these. We have a shared space to look at some of the things we want to learn. I noticed this question wasn't specific to anything, but a lot of these topics are, no surprise, Web3 or at least software development. And question number 2, we still had some Web3 and
What?
software development, but we started moving a little bit away. And then I noticed when we got to problems, a lot of these are much bigger problems than only Web3 and software. Steve, what were you saying?
Some person was talking to me, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So it's interesting how our scope is kind of zooming out as we go from things we want to learn to what we want to do and finally out to problems. And we'll come back around to some of these things in just a minute. Now, with those done, and keep in mind, you can keep working on those. I'm going to switch back into presentation mode for just a minute. And let's go here. See how we looked at this one, what I want to learn, what I want to do, problems I want to solve. And now I need to open up the next frames. Okay. So a couple of terminology things, and we're going to just start to build up a little metaphor about software. Okay. So serial computing, if you don't know this word serial, this is, imagine a mainframe processor that can only do one thing at a time, right? A serial computer system does one thing at a time in some sequential order, okay? As opposed to parallel computing, where we talk about doing things simultaneously. And there are a few different ways to achieve this. There's been some clever software written over the years that allows tasks to be completed in parallel on the same processor. Or maybe you're aware that in many computers these days, in 2024, when you buy a computer, you'll have multiple processors inside. And part of what that enables is parallel processing, right? Multiple tasks being able to be completed at the same time. Now, we don't want to mistake the concept of serial computing for this word serialization, okay? Serialization is different from this distinction between serial and parallel systems, but as we'll see, it is related, okay? When you hear somebody talk about serializing, and we often have to talk about this in blockchain development, we're talking about converting data into some common format so that it's easy to store and easy to transmit, okay? All transactions on Cardano are serialized into the same format, which ensures that they're easy to be read by nodes and block producers. Any questions about those three terms? Serial computing, parallel computing, and this concept of serialization?
What's the example of serialization again?
So one example would be taking the datum in a UTXO and converting it into CBOR.
Okay.
So it can go on chain. That step of converting it to CBOR is called serializing the datum.
Makes sense. Cool.
Okay. And once you do have that CBOR string, it's really easy. I can send it, I can copy and paste it into a Discord message. I can attach it to a UTXO and put it on chain. It's easy to store, it's easy to transmit.
So that's basically what compilers do. When you compile code, it's being serialized.
Oh,
More or
okay.
less, yeah, like into the executable. And actually that's an imprecise use of the word, but it's a helpful example. One of the reasons it's helpful is think about how whenever you do compile a program, you have to compile it for different operating systems.
Mhm.
This version for Windows, that version for Mac, often two versions for Mac at this point, because Mac has two different processors, right? And then the whole Linux universe is going to require at least one and usually more compilations. And part of the reason we have to do those in different ways is that, yeah, the way executable files are stored in different operating systems does change from one OS to another. Juan, what do you think? Oh, I think you might be muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking in interoperability, what is going to happen among chains, and we need to serialize information and data in a way that is, transferable and
Absolutely right. Yeah. We have to get serialization right on a single blockchain so that we can then look beyond that towards how do we serialize data across blockchains? And that's ongoing work right now. Beautiful. Okay, so once again, with this concept of serial versus parallel computing, and this reminder just not to confuse serialization with serial computing, here's our next question. Is the Cardano blockchain a serial system or a parallel system? Anybody want to put themselves out there and try to answer this question?
Well, sidechains and Hydra heads are doing things in parallel, but they're doing them to be put onto the Cardano protocols in a serialized way. That's the way I would say that.
So you can take some of the activity off chain and put it on a side chain or over here in a Hydra head. But eventually when things go back on chain, they have to be standardized, or we could say serialized, to get them back into that parallel system.
Right? Because time, because one block to the next block is based on time.
Okay. Juan, what do you think?
I think we are in both parallelism and serialization, because different projects are in different stages, and the interoperability is not across the board. But in terms of a comparison, the way I see it is that in comparison with other projects, we are in the parallelism. But then within Cardano, we are working really hard to serialize everything that's been done, right? That's the way I see it.
And remember, I'm asking about serial computing, not serialization of data into a common format, but serial, right? Are we doing one computation at a time, or are we doing many computations at a time?
You have lots of different nodes, and each of the nodes is working independently. So that's parallel or distributed. So you've got, but the protocol itself, it's set up so that one node is producing the next block in the blockchain, and so it's, yeah, again, that's serializing, but it's still nodes collaborating in parallel to get to that point.
And they're all doing the same work, right? Because everybody agrees on the info on the block.
It's not exactly, because they might have a different set of data in a different order in the memcache.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's based on what after the data is distributed through the network, it's based on whatever the block producer sees. So everybody else is accepting the block producer's view of things, basically.
James, I don't know how flexible you are with your presentation. There was something going on with protocol. I guess they're SIPs proposals. Are you aware of the Rick McCracken has proposed increasing block size, and Pi Lanningham has proposed increasing memory unit size.
Mhm.
And they were in
Is that a single proposal, or are those competing proposals?
well, there are different ways to go about getting ahead of the bull market. They both have the same concerns, and they're worried about, high DEX transaction numbers in the bull market, and they don't want to see it get clogged up. And they think it was an interesting discussion. That CBIA group sponsored it. Lucas was like moderating the conversation, and it was really interesting. The Pi's thought was a little bit more nuanced, and he was pointing out somebody talked about increasing transaction size, and he made the point that if you do that, you can never go back, and that could be a problem in the future. And I thought that was interesting. And he says with the memory unit size, and there's two types. Oh shit, I can't remember the second one. But he says you can back that off.
Execution steps, yeah.
You can come back on that. And I think that Rick believes that you can come back on the block size. You could change your mind about that later. But it's all to allow the necessary throughput to keep going without any real, clogging. I thought it was a pretty good discussion. As little as I understood, I felt enlightened.
That's good. That's good. And this question of where are the bottlenecks going to come from is important.
Mm.
Ken, you got me thinking, is it appropriate to compare like imagine an 8-core processor. What does that mean? Well, it just means it's got 8 processing units that can be doing different computations from each other at the same time. Would it be appropriate to compare an 8-core processor with a Cardano network with 8 stake pools on it?
Yeah, like well, if you've got different processors running in parallel, then there is asynchronous communication involved in some way. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can add,
That's
you
the
can
key
you can
part.
put something in there that will synchronize things, but at the way that they work naturally is asynchronously.
And that's because of what you mentioned a minute ago, Ken, the transaction ordering. Everybody's going to have a different order in their mempool.
Yeah, like it all depends on what messages each node sees first, like where the
Mm-hmm.
messages come from. It propagates
Mm.
through the network in a different order.
But eventually a block is finalized, right?
Yeah.
And one of those nodes does the heaviest lifting of that computing to finalize that block and gets a reward for minting that block. And for me, this is what's exciting about comparing it to the processor with multiple cores is that in both cases, the nodes that are not doing the work still have to wait for the node that is doing the work to be done. And in a blockchain, we can see it because it moves slowly enough for us to see, oh, wait, this node over here has to wait for that block to be minted and has to know about it before it can think about the next transaction. The chip in my computer moves so fast that I can't really see that, even though at a very rapid scale it is happening, right? This process might have to wait for that one over there to be done. And so this is a concept I really wanted to bring here today, right? If we think about now the blockchain, right? We know this, right? And so maybe you've heard or witnessed debates about concurrency, but I want to frame it this way. Look, in any given block, there can be a bunch of transactions. A block can rarely, I mean, sometimes on a test net, maybe a block has just 1 or 0 transactions, but on mainnet, pretty much every block is going to have a bunch of transactions in it. And in those transactions, lots of different tokens can be spent. But the key thing to remember is that any given token can only be spent once per block, right? If Steve is sending tokens somewhere, the person he's sending them to can't spend them until they receive them, right? And if I'm using a UTXO in my wallet to send somebody a little ADA and I'm getting the change back, I can't use the change UTXO until it's in a block, and then I can use it as the input to the next one. And like I just shared, this really isn't too different from how parallel computing works. It's just that the blockchain moves a little bit closer to human speed so that we can actually see the concurrency. Does that make sense? Okay. So even if you're a hardware engineer, even if you're in the business of making chips, this is one of the technical problems that had to be solved by people as they were learning how to make chips, right? Is yeah, how do we allow these different processes to happen? And how do you make a schedule that shows that, oh, this task is going to be routed over to that processor, whereas that one's going to be routed over here? That's a hard problem. And people have made decades of progress that we all benefit from. solving it. And so the next thing, if we buy that, I want to propose this, right? If we talk about time, and Steve, you already brought it to this topic of, right, time boxes, any time box, call it a week, call it a day, whatever, right? Lots of different people can do lots of different things in a given time box, but how many different things can any of us do? And this is where we get to this concept of parallelism when we're talking about many parties being able to get stuff done and interact, but maybe a serial system when it comes to the best of what any one of us can do. Okay. How much of a leap is that? Does that feel like a fair comparison to make between how transaction and tokens move on the blockchain and how we might move through life, right? We have this option of trying to do many things at once or trying to do one thing at a time. And the claim I'd like to make is that this is what collaboration looks like, right? When I collaborate, I can get closer towards this ideal of doing a manageable number of things in a given time box. So what are the
So
implications? Yeah, go ahead.
this thing about time, I find really interesting. I've always understood at the physics level that time was used as a constant. And recently, in listening to some of the scientists that work on the idea that what we live in is a simulation, and they know that what we live in is not the true structure of everything. You know, so like they take guesses to try to build what they think underlies this reality that we experience. And in that process, then what they've had to deal with and are working on, you know, coming up with formulas and calculations to, you know, let go of the idea that time is a constant and that it's actually a construct. And so what they're trying to do is come up with the math that would allow you to apply time, you know, arbitrarily, you know, with arbitrary constraints. And I just find that fascinating. And because of block propagation and all of this shit, I've thought, man, if they really figure out some math where you can, you know, just kind of make your own time model, then what does that mean? You know, like in terms of how we could do distributed systems when time is flexible. I suppose
Yeah,
you have to have a quantum computer to do that.
well, like time, there's the relativistic aspect of time. So like when you've got things that are happening in different places, it's mathematically it gets to the point where it's impossible to tell what order things happened in. Like if when
Right.
you're talking about the space between different things happening, so like um yeah, if you have, yeah, I lost my train of thought for a second. um yeah, if you're talking about a system where um you have dependencies, like it has to do with what things depend on other things, then you have have to have some sort of causal order to things, but it is to the extent that you can make sure that the work that needs to be done doesn't have to depend on someone else's work, then you don't have to worry about causal order and the weird the weirdness of trying to synchronize things that happen in different places.
Right. And then why do we even want to connect these things between different places and different time frames? You know, like that's, you know, like
Well,
what are we?
that's important.
Yeah.
Some things are dependencies,
Yeah.
right? If I'm trying to accomplish something that does have a dependency, maybe I don't care about the whole process that it took to achieve that dependency. I don't need to know the details of maybe the time of each component part or even whether it was done efficiently, but I do need the outcome in order to take my next step over here.
Yeah. And that's, you know, this gets really philosophical for me because I feel like this, you know, our generations, everybody that's in this room, whatever your age is, we've been inundated with this idea that this is all one thing. And I'm not saying that it's not, but in this world, in this reality, you know, like, you know, what goes on in this county of 80,000 people around here, they don't care what we're doing. And there's no reason that they should. And so like some of this is kind of abstractly connecting different groups and creating dependencies where, you know, they don't have to be any dependencies. And so like this, that's what I mean. This gets philosophical. Is that a good idea? You know, is that a bad idea? You know, and like, you know, when I was introduced to the idea of 6 degrees of separation, I'm like, oh shit, no, that's real. That's real. You know, like I know how close I am to Vladimir Putin. You know, it's not 6 degrees. It's less than that. You know, I know that. And must we? Or is it actually a really good idea? I mean, people live where I live because they have a hard time with others, right? There's a significant percentage of the 1,400 people on this mountain where I am that have social anxiety. And they do everything they can to be independent of y'all.
Mhm.
You know?
And hey, it might turn out, I mean, that's what we're going to find out over the next 30 years is this whole blockchain thing, is it actually useful? Right? We don't have a global reason to say yes for everybody yet. We might never, and it'll be interesting to find out what subset of people actually use these tools. But that said, I can imagine a future where we do have some breakthrough that makes some of those 80,000 people say, oh, you know, that is useful. And I can imagine if that scenario happens, people asking a question along the lines of, where have you guys been? But when somebody asks that question, where have you been? They might also be asking, hey, when were you talking about this, right? Apparently you've been thinking about this. When and where were you? So it's interesting to think about how time will expand and contract in those cases, because there's people who are going to, a few years from now, start asking of themselves some of the questions that we started asking of each other 3 years ago. Did those conversations happen at the same time?
Well, the blockchain itself is basically like a timeline, like all the, it's got a system in place for making sure that you get an absolute order of anything that's dependent on anything else. And so the way I sort of see it is that you can have work that's not attached to the blockchain, and then maybe just having a way to verify, you just use the blockchain to verify that something happened at a specific block, and then you can prove that you did this thing before someone else tried to steal it from you, or whatever it is that you're trying to secure some point in history that you did this one thing.
Some proof of order. So this already raises a few questions, but I'd like to go a little farther into some of these. Okay, so we're already talking about this, right? And we've mentioned this idea of synchronization, right? Whether we're talking about nodes being in sync with each other and finally agreeing on when the transactions came in, or whether we're talking about a multi-core processor. We need tasks to be synchronized because there are dependencies. That's like that for me is just a fact of existence, that some things depend on others, right? And although I might seek opportunities to have some independence when possible, I recognize that in any technical process, some steps have to happen before others. And I think life is the same way, right? And that's not to say this is like a hard and fast rule. It's just a recognition that sometimes there are dependencies. And anytime we talk about dependencies, then serialization helps, right? This is why SIPs exist, for example. Let's figure out a way to share the conversation about this or that topic, right? And like I already mentioned, obviously for like Datum, for transactions to go on chain, they have to be serialized into CBOR. We know that. And this is the key thing I've been thinking about. I think all of this applies to collaboration too, right? If we're going to collaborate well, we need to serialize. We need a format for the structure of that collaboration. We need some raw ingredients that help us to synchronize effectively. And synchronization allows us to think about this metaphor of the blockchain as well, right? Every time tokens move from one address to another, that's a transaction. But so is this meeting. This meeting is a transaction. We're spending time with each other, right? We're moving into some conversations, okay? And when we ask people to collaborate, when we take that risk, that's a transaction too. Hey, you want to build something together? All right, well, how are we going to agree to do that? And so we could talk about like just the simple on-chain part as a transaction fee, but often that fee is the least painful part. The time I spend on a transaction, the work of serializing it into some shared format, the work of communication, these are costs as well. And so with these transaction costs in mind, we can start also thinking about what are the raw materials for collaboration. And some of these are things we've talked about over these first few months at Gimbalabs this year. But here's just a short list that I was able to come up with. And I wonder if you would add anything. I think we have to pay attention to each other. We have to pay attention to reality in order to collaborate well. It helps when people put thoughts in writing. It helps when people read what other folks have written, so we can be aligned on that. It helps to exercise, right? Exercise, by this I mean a few things, both processes, right? So like this is the form of practice using S3 patterns, run through the exercise of practicing consent, for example, so we can keep getting better at it, but also just in a physical sense. You know, each of us, Juan, is each of us getting enough exercise right now? And what does taking care of our physical bodies do for this ability to collaborate? Would you add anything to this list? What are some other raw materials for collaboration?
You know, like awareness, like sensing, the sensing part, you know, just being aware. In particular, I've just been thinking a lot about spatial awareness, like where, but it could also be in time, like, okay, what is the time? But also like how, yeah, awareness. Yeah. Yeah. Space time and maybe like proprioception, like being aware of ourselves, you know.
Mm.
um
I know that one.
proprioception. It generally has to do with like knowing where you are in space. Like a gymnast has to have great proprioception to land. And
Okay, so I like that. I like that word. I am familiar with it, although I've never spoken it out loud. Uh, because that dynamic exists when collaboration, because we have to have an understanding of what one another have for basic background knowledge, both of the thing that they're bringing, but also the thing that is trying to be collaborated upon, right? And that finding that base level of basic background knowledge, like that's really, to me, that seems really difficult about everything that we want to do. Like to me, it's more difficult than the coding, is finding out, the communication part, and what does somebody need to know to take advantage of these tools. It's a really, really difficult thing to define so that you can just move.
I think that shared goals and a strategy are part of that too. If you don't have
Yeah.
a shared goals and what you're trying to do, and you don't have a strategy to get there, then everybody's going to be doing their own thing, and it's not going to be efficient.
oh, that's a good one, Ken. The in the game, and I've been watching these like game walkthroughs with like a professional dungeon master. They talk about tone and mood, like what kind of campaign are we going to have here? Are we hack and slash? Are we really interested in the story? Are we going to role play? Are we going to use voices? What's appropriate and what's not. Like, so shared goals, shared strategy, ground rules, like, and really you could maybe even make it in the umbrella of just agreements, right?
Yeah. What about on the vital attention and also focus? Because we can collaborate, but if we are not persistent and we are not synchronized, then the result is not going to be as good.
Yeah, hello everyone. Great to be here.
Yeah, you are.
So, yeah, it's a long time. Didn't see you, Steve. Good to see you here. So, I mean, trust will be a big issue, right, for collaboration. And I want something that I thought a lot about recently. Normally we say the devil is in the detail, right? And I think in terms of collaboration, the devil is not in the details, in the mindset. Right? Because more we go into the details and this and that, I mean, it's a mindset, right? We need somehow to trust other people and say, okay, I'm willing to collaborate and to share information and to not to maximize my personal benefits and whatever. So it's kind of a mindset. And we hear about collaboration a lot in every conference today, right? Everyone say we need to collaborate, okay, but no one is actually doing it. So yeah, so it's have to be kind of a mindset and kind of let go of some stuff in order to build something together. So the devil is not in the details. I mean, it's in the yeah, it's also in the. I mean, more we go into the detail, maybe more the devil wants us to go into the detail, but we actually need to collaborate. Thank you.
This is part of what I was trying to get at when I say exercise and practice. Why? Because in part it builds trust, right? If I don't practice with my band, we're not going to trust each other when we go try to play a show. We haven't had the chance to build that trust by practicing together. When we run through an exercise together, we end up trusting each other, right? Trust is built when we play games, for example, which are a form of exercises. And then towards this one, shared goals and shared strategy, I agree with this completely. I agree that we need agreements. I agree that we need synchronization. For all of these, what I would like to propose is that the raw material that gets us here is committing to doing the writing and the reading. I can have great goals. If I haven't tried to communicate them, they don't have much value. If I've tried to communicate something, but nobody's listening, or if I've put it in writing and nobody read it, then it doesn't have much value. Goals are great, and all of us have them. All of us can come up with genius strategies inside our own heads. Do those strategies turn into things we can actually do? I'd like to propose that making sure to put it in writing and making sure that people read it is one way to get closer and closer to that ideal. Now, here's the thing. That's exactly what we've been doing in Project Catalyst. We've been doing the reading. We've been doing the writing. There's so much. Let's talk about what's happening at Catalyst today for just a minute. Catalyst Fund 11, 2024. This is the current state. Just you can let me know if you disagree, but this is how I read it. In Fund 11, proposers got to write proposals like they've done in the past. And also like they've done in the past, they got feedback so that they could revise the proposal. That was great. And then when the proposal is ready, proposers get to campaign for voter attention. Attention, one of those key raw materials for collaboration. Finally, when everybody's tired of going to Twitter Spaces and everybody's talked, we go on a little app on our phones, and for as long as we can maintain the patience to do so, we vote for as many of the proposals that we intended to. It's not an easy experience, but you can kind of get through it. And if you really care, I know there's a handful of people every voting round who vote for every proposal, right? I guess that was no longer necessary with downvoting out the window, but still we've been competing for people's attention. Then this crazy thing happens, and this I believe this is absolutely broken. And what I really want to do, among other things today, is expose this and share an alternative. I've found it very frustrating that even after doing these first 4 steps, I'm now a successful proposer. And what's the first thing I have to do? I have to log into a different portal and either rewrite or copy and paste from my original proposal so that I can get approval from anonymous community reviewers. No, these aren't the same people as the voters, not necessarily. Okay, but now I'm in this other process, in this other portal. And then when feedback comes in, if I'm not approved, I have to resubmit my proposal again. And thank goodness the Catalyst team just added a button that you can click to populate your milestone with the previous draft. But that didn't exist at first. And so this was kind of an arduous process. And it might seem like a small thing, right? What are we asking everybody to do? Well, we're asking them to take their proposal that they wrote on one platform and migrate it over to another one so that the milestones can be followed. All in all, for any individual, it takes a little bit of time, but that time adds up. And it's super limited. And it stops us, I think, from having time to do the deeper work of cultivating these raw materials, of building trust. I don't know who I'm trying to trust. I don't know the names of my reviewers. And even if I did, I don't have time for exercise. Let's just talk about the physical sense. No, I didn't have time to exercise last weekend because I was submitting milestones for a proposal that I already wrote. It was a lot of cut and paste, but it was also moving stuff around. That's really inefficient. And when we add those inefficiencies to a system, it's harder to collaborate because all of us are chasing around the tasks that are right in front of us. And that's what distraction is, right? When we're stuck paying attention to all this little stuff instead of the big things that we really wanted to do, instead of maybe the big problems that we really wanted to solve, or at least the deep stuff that we really wanted to learn, right? All of those minutes spent copying and pasting proposals prevents new projects from happening. And it's just a matter of creating new bureaucracy. So I'm frustrated by this. I'd like to do better very soon, but I also don't want to just complain about it. I want to really think about how we're going to do better here. But let me know, am I misrepresenting anything, or would you add or remove anything from this overview of how Catalyst works as of Fund 11?
I had no idea. I had no idea that was happening. I'm flabbergasted. Who are these people? How are they being incentivized? Where does that money come from?
It's part of the pool of Catalyst funds, but to answer that question, you have to ask where are the Catalyst funds coming from in the first place, and there hasn't been full transparency.
Who chose them?
I think they
What is
opted.
it? That's part of that 50 million though?
It
For the
is.
fund?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to be so.
And I know people who have successful proposers, but have failed to get approval through the milestone portal yet, even though their proposal was voted on the way it was written.
It's
It's a different way to downvoting them.
I would think after this recent revelation that the Turbo Daedalus guy actually knew what he was talking about, right? Like he's proved his concept and kind of freaked everybody out that they would back off from this second level of approval. It's just
Yeah,
so Joran.
Yeah, I mean, there's many other things if we want to go deep on Catalyst that were there, but
yeah.
well, and related to collaboration. But one thing that is missing there is actually the voting process, right? So you can actually have a lot of proposals that got voted in, for example, that have one-line milestones, okay, and doesn't really explain much, right? So I'm a milestone reviewer myself as well, and obviously the attention is how you approve it and how you trust and so on. But sometimes, someone gets 450,000 ADA and you have one-line milestone because they just got some voters voting for him, right? So what do we do in this case? Just to give an example, right? So how do we help the community say, okay, great that you got funded, congratulations. Can you give some more information, right, about what you're going to deliver so the community can follow up on that. It's just an example of the process of the other side of this process. But Catalyst went through many changes around that, and there is a voting system, right, that also needs to be taken into account. And it moved from where it started to where it's today, which is very different Catalyst than what we started.
That's right.
And
we have to keep refining it. So I'd like to propose a couple of specific things here. For example, this milestone approval process, one thing that I think would improve current state would be simply to move this up to here. Whoops, that didn't work the way I thought it was.
yeah, 100% agree. It has to move to before.
Right? What if the whole milestone and whether they're anonymous or not, what if this was just part of the proposal writing process? And then once the milestones were approved, just like, you're getting feedback and refining the proposal at this step, then you can vote. And people are voting not just on the proposal, but also on knowing that those milestones, for example, are ready to go. Okay, now this is
100%.
just one idea, but it's also something that we can bring here, okay? Because I think the impact is bigger than we think, right? Right? The impact of repeated work on your attention, your ability to want to do the writing, your ability to do the reading, right? What happens when, to read about this one proposal, I have to find it over here on idea scale, and then I have to find it again in the milestone report, for example. Where is the source of truth, right? What effect does repeated work have on my ability to exercise things that really matter? Once again, whether I'm talking about exercising my body physically or exercising in new habits with groups of people. In both cases, if I'm spending my time copying and pasting a proposal that I already wrote and was already approved, I'm not exercising in any of those ways. I don't have time to practice. More generally, what is the impact of bureaucracy? It's an easy thing to complain about, but it's I think too often when we complain about it, we treat it as kind of like this harmless annoyance. And I'd like to highlight that maybe it's worse than that,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
It takes away my ability to focus. It's distraction, and bureaucratic systems make me feel like, oh, I'm getting done what I got to get done. Check. I did my milestone report. Damn, that feels good. But why was I doing it in the first place? Why was that made to feel like the important thing rather than the deeper work I could have been doing? Sorry, Steve.
well, if you go into that last approval process, and you're more or less forced, cajoled, convinced you have to change it again, and then over time, how many proposals actually turn into something that was not voted on, right? And that really bugs me, right? That about this whole idea. We voted on this one,
Right.
and now these anonymous people are saying, yeah, we don't like it.
And
Yeah.
it reconstructs actually the very system we have in the United States,
Mhm.
where and anybody living in the United States right now is aware that it's unelected bureaucrats who often have the biggest impact on our lives, often a bigger impact than the representatives we voted for. Setting aside whether or not we approve of those elected candidates is fine, but the truth is that anonymous bureaucrats do influence our lives here in the United States. And now we're seeing the exact same thing happen with Catalyst. We're watching funded proposers rewrite, like Steve just said, their proposal perhaps to something that it wasn't the version that got voted on, because we have to meet, in some cases, I think they qualify as whims, right, of these people who are doing the milestone approval. And this impacts the whole system. So what are we going to do about it? Okay, well, what have we been thinking about at Gimbalabs? We've been here playing around with blockchain from the beginning, right? We've been playing more recently with S3, Sociocracy 3.0, which gives us some patterns for how proposal forming can work. And we know we have this concept of project-based learning that emphasizes practice and exercise, your experience, right? So it's not just you're getting the knowledge put into your head, but you have the ability to use it and figure out what it implies. And I think these Sociocracy 3.0 patterns, one of which we practiced last week at Gimbalabs Open Spaces as we started to look at a proposal to spend some part of our available funds on Notion accounts, for example. which would allow us to write proposals, to refine them together, and to upend this catalyst process, and instead to have the whole proposal in one space, refined over time. And then guess what? The moment it's approved, we just use the very same document because it's got a Trello board right at the bottom of it where we can start defining tasks and getting that thing done. And so I wanted to bring this concept of S3 and using any software that we might end up using as an opportunity to practice removing some of the bureaucracy. And I wanted to try to establish a really clear argument against bureaucracy that's not just based on how it makes me feel, which is obviously not great, but more about what is the impact? What's the impact on collaboration? And I'm very interested over these next few weeks as we start to practice working on projects here at Gimbalabs to pay very close attention to how much bureaucracy we might choose to build and how the alternative to bureaucracy is open collaboration, right? Space to pay attention, to be aware, to build trust, to write something once and then revise it because I did it once and I'm not copying and pasting it, but I'm actually using it as an instrumental tool in making some progress, okay? So I wanted to just really kind of think about this together today. Yeah, and then we
Can I
have
add something on
some other
that?
stuff we could look at. Yeah,
I
thanks.
think also another thing is how you incentivize collaboration. And I don't know if it's so to add here, but I think the incentivization today on Catalyst is not necessary to collaborate. And yeah, anyway, just wanted to put that in.
Yeah. So really quickly on that, we can say the words that we want to incentivize collaboration, right? And what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Does it mean that we're just trying to figure out a way to hold a carrot out in front of people that says, hey, come over here and collaborate? Or are we building systems that make collaboration absolutely irresistible?
Yeah, like it.
Okay. Because I think you know my answer to that. I'm not interested in just putting a carrot out here. Come on, everybody, let's collaborate. No, let's build a system where, yeah, of course I want to, of course I want to do that. How could I not want to get involved in that system? But what does that system look like? It emphasizes these things. It's a place where I can be attentive and focused. It's a place where people are proving time and time again that they do the reading and they do the writing, where we exercise, where we can be aware of space and time and whatever, how I'm spinning around in this gimbal or something. Right? And where we have the shared goals, the shared agreements, we're able to synchronize. I believe very strongly that if we build this, if these things are happening, then we already have incentives to collaborate. But it's will we do this together? Will we build this culture of attention and doing the writing and doing the reading, for example? And over the next few months, we get to find out. What do you think? There's a couple of metaphors. So one of the things I am interested in doing is using some of this as just draft material to collaborate on some blog posts that we might choose to write or otherwise presentations. Okay, so there's other metaphors. We looked a little bit at concurrency today, right? This concept of how do people both do many things at once while also focusing on one thing at a time? And the answer is by collaborating. But we can also look at, and so we looked at this day, right? Like I showed the UTXO model, this concept of token can only be involved in one transaction at a time. But we can also dive into other metaphors. And here's just two suggestions. This concept of private local state, right? Where you have like the Midnight Network. If anybody is not aware of how it works, you basically keep a store of secrets on your own computer. And then you just prove that those secrets have answers, okay, when you're trying to go public on that network. There's a lot more to say, and that was a major oversimplification, but that's one of the core ideas. And so from that, if I can have a private local state on my computer, can't an organization have some private local state, even if I want global anonymity, like the Catalyst milestone approval process has? Do we need that in a Zoom room full of 12 people? Are there ways that smaller organizations could adopt this principle of private local state and then be able to have high trust systems that move very quickly? And then pub key hashes, this is at the core of the voting debate, right? If we're voting based on who has this wallet or that one, then often we have to judge the weight of those wallets by how many tokens they hold. But we know there's other ways to vote. And we know that playing with scale is one of the ways to do that. So I'm sure there's other guiding metaphors. And so if anybody is interested in over these next few months, thinking from like the metaphor perspective about some of the things that Web3 has for us, but then taking those metaphors off chain and into the way we collaborate or into our lives, I think that could be a really interesting blog series. Because again, my goal is not to complain without trying to share an alternative, but I have complaints about this. It has not felt good, and it has not felt good to watch other people navigate this over the last 10 days or so. And I know we can do better than this. So I hope this is productive to be thinking about it this way. And that's what I've got for today. Thanks for letting me think out loud here.
I really, this zero knowledge proof of milestone achievement would be a pretty significant milestone. I mean, like that's pretty cool. If you could do that within a, like the members of this Gimbalabs community, right? If we could everybody just do their thing, and then there's proof out there,
Absolutely.
I was envisioning that how do you call it? The work with the rework that you guys are doing, the ones that made the proposals to me, as a way to ensure sustainability, and that those proposals will be successful and help people to kind of, get more conscious of what they are doing. But then for sure that now that I realize there's no guarantee that they are going to get the prize after even being voted. So that's when things stings a little bit, a lot actually. Because then the attention, you have to keep still proving yourself, making sure that you'll be successful. And then that time is valuable for implementation, for many other things.
I agree, Juan. And for me, the desired state is to get to this point where people are spending less time proving themselves, which I agree is too much right now, and more time saying, no, this project was already approved, and now I get to work on it. And everything, all these other projects that are happening, everything that's happening outside, my need to campaign just to do work that other people think is important, that all goes out the window. And now I can focus on this thing, right? And that's where individual, right, serial system comes from, focusing on one thing at a time, which has health benefits, has outcomes benefits. There's so many benefits towards having the option of focusing on one thing, while at the same time, collectively, we're doing many things at once, right? Across the organization, people might be learning all of these things. Across an organization, we might be doing several of these things or making progress on several problems, even if at the individual level, there's a manageable amount, ideally, one thing going on at one time.
Yeah. You know, the process and the improvement of the process is also a result of some kind of thing that is happening, right? The involvement of the process is a result of certain practices, right, within the system. So, yeah, I would actually, I think you know, you can always complicate and complicate more the system, try to find ways for it. But yeah, I think again, the shift that happened in Catalyst from, you know, the old Catalyst to the new one is much, yeah, there is a shift again, in mindset, I would call it, what I mentioned before. And from the way it started to today, and I'm not saying what's better for the ecosystem, right? It depends what the Catalyst objective is. You know, it started as an experiment for collaboration, and I think now became an innovation fund somehow.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's kind of the two different systems.
Well, hopefully collaboration can be alive and well over here.
Yeah.
So tomorrow at Open Spaces, we're going to go through ideally brief, but like we've been doing the last few Open Spaces meetings, we're going to give things the time it needs. But really, we're going to open with the question, does everybody consent to the proposal to start using Notion on the Gimbalabs team? Okay. And what will follow from that is both the support in terms of documentation and just guiding people to start using the system, but also the expectation that if work is going to happen, it starts by writing a proposal, putting those thoughts in writing. And then it continues backed by the expectation other people are going to read it, and that we do the exercises and we practice refining those proposals together so that then they can become tasks that we're working on. Okay. That's where we're going. We're going to see if we can help each other to get there. But I'm optimistic and I'm excited to see if this system gives us a proactive response to maybe some of what we're seeing in Catalyst, because I think at small scale, it's essential to do better. I don't know if we'll do better at a large scale. We'll find out, right? But at least at a small scale, we can practice and then we can see how much of that does scale up. So thanks, everybody. And I just want to reiterate, if anybody starts to get excited about maybe writing about some of this stuff together, this is my goal. I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of think out loud about something that could turn into a blog post, but to do it kind of collectively here. And I'd like to experiment with co-writing, blog posts or PBL courses in this way. So if you're interested, we'll talk.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I'm looking forward to those conversations.
Thanks, Steve.
Loving it. Super great meeting. Wow. Master at work. You took us on a little journey. I had no idea, and I got lost and found several different times. I laughed, I cried. It was better than cats. It was beautiful.
Everybody.
Gimbalabs, better than cats. We'll take it. Keep going on the journey, Newman. Yeah. Thanks y'all for going on the lecture route today.
beautiful.
But I hope that we can make something of some of these concepts. I'll drop all of this into the playground board as well, and then we can reference it as needed. But thanks, everybody. Until tomorrow.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Have a
See
good
ya.
one.